The mechanical tolerances were off by 4 thousandths of an inch on the high-precision bearing assembly, and I could feel the subtle, irregular friction humming through the steel casing long before the computerized sensors registered a warning on the monitor screen. That is what 21 years of hands-on experience on the manufacturing plant floor teaches a man. Your palms recognize the microscopic deviation long before digital instruments print out a diagnostic sheet. My name is Nathan Vance, though most veteran mechanics at the plant simply call me Nate. I am 54 years old, and I have spent 18 years as Senior Quality Assurance Director at Summit Precision Manufacturing in Cleveland, Ohio. I started at this facility when I was 33, working evening shifts on the stamping line, the same industrial complex where my father spent 30 years operating heavy hydraulic presses before local steel foundries began shutting down. I worked my way up from line operator to shift manager, earning my degree in mechanical engineering by taking night classes at the local community college, while my wife Karen was pregnant with our first child. Over 2 decades, I designed the quality control protocols that maintain our operational precision at 98.8% efficiency and save Summit Precision Manufacturing over $14 million annually in scrap reduction and warranty claims. The quality certification framework that allows our sales department to bid on multi-million-dollar automotive component contracts was written line by my hands. Tier 1 automotive manufacturers trust our technical specifications because they trust my personal oversight and my signature on compliance paperwork. Yet despite 21 total years of loyal dedication, my commitment has not translated into a decent paycheck adjustment in over 18 years. Preston Bennett sits behind his polished mahogany desk in his executive corner suite. He is delivering the exact same canned speech he has handed me for 3 consecutive fiscal years. Preston is 37 years old, holding a business degree from an elite university back east, and he has spent 3 years at Summit, convincing himself that managing industrial manufacturing is merely sliding numbers around on a spreadsheet. He believes he understands supply chain logistics better than men who have been turning wrenches and calibrating CNC machineries since before he learned corporate synergy. I glanced down at my watch, a sturdy stainless steel watch my father gave me when I passed my engineering board examination. The afternoon shift transition is happening in 25 minutes, and Line 4 requires immediate recalibration before we run the next batch of driveshaft housings. Yet here I am, listening to a young executive explain why 18 years of zero wage adjustments for inflation is considered reasonable corporate policy. My wife Karen has been working extra shifts at the regional healthcare network to ensure our household budget keeps pace with rising property taxes and our son's university tuition fees. Nate, true corporate loyalty builds a lasting executive legacy, Preston tells me, steepling his fingers across his desk as if delivering profound wisdom from a textbook. Legacy sounds magnificent in a quarterly report, but tell that to my mortgage lender, I respond quietly. Tell that to the bank handling my son's engineering tuition bills. He speaks glibly about adverse market conditions and how the organization must tighten its belt. Meanwhile, the board of directors just authorized substantial executive bonus packages directly tied to operational efficiency improvements delivered by my proprietary quality control systems. My protocols, my daily oversight, and my relationships with industrial suppliers who will not return Preston's calls unless my name is listed on the invitation. I do not raise my voice, nor do I slam my fists on his mahogany table. Working on an industrial floor teaches a man that blowing off steam changes nothing. You maintain composure when temperatures rise. I simply look him in the eyes and ask for structural clarity. So what you are telling me, Preston, is that there is no concrete timeline or budget allocation for reviewing my compensation structure. Preston leans back in his chair, offering the condescending smile that young corporate ladder climbers practice in office mirrors. We need dedicated team players right now, Nate, he says softly. Professionals who understand the broader strategic picture. Team player is executive terminology for staying silent while taking whatever financial crumbs management decides to throw your way. I have heard that exact sentence before, typically right before they assign 50 hours of uncompensated overtime work under the guise of shared sacrifice. The broader strategic picture is something I personally constructed brick by brick, every quality checkpoint, every stress test algorithm, and every supplier audit that keeps this plant operational. 3 years ago, before Preston was hired, Summit nearly lost its primary supplier agreement with Autotech Industries because of a batch of defective castings manufactured by an overseas vendor. I am the engineer who stepped in, redesigned the entire testing procedure, and worked 80 hours a week for a month to bring our defect rate down to 0.6%, saving the contract. I leave his suite with my back straight and my jaw set. There are no dramatic outbursts, only a quiet understanding that something fundamental has permanently shifted. The tolerance threshold of my patience has just moved completely out of specification. And in high-precision engineering, when a component falls out of specification, you replace the entire assembly. That evening, I sit at our kitchen table with my personal laptop. I am not updating my professional resume because my credentials and industry reputation have been solid for years. Instead, I open the direct application portal for Vanguard Industrial Solutions, the premier competitor in our regional manufacturing sector. Karen sets a hot mug of coffee beside my keyboard and does not ask a question. After 25 years of marriage, she knows the subtle signs when I have reached my operational limit. One firm click of the mouse submits the portfolio. I am no longer asking Preston Bennett for a wage adjustment. I am officially executing my exit strategy. 72 hours later, on a Thursday morning, Preston calls me back into his executive office. This time there is no condescending smile, no offer of coffee, and no speech about team spirit. Resting on his desk is a printed sheet showing my updated public professional profile, accompanied by a highlighted comment from a senior recruiter at Vanguard Industrial Solutions. "So the rumors floating around management are true," Preston says, sliding the printed page across the desk as if he has uncovered evidence of corporate espionage. "You are actively interviewing with our direct competitors." I do not flinch, nor do I reach for the paper. I submitted an application on my own personal time. Using my own personal computer equipment at home, I reply calmly. The exact same way I earned my engineering credentials 30 years ago, on nights and weekends, without spending a single minute of company time. His jaw tightens, and the blue vein on the side of his temple begins to throb with tension. "You have chosen deliberate disloyalty to this firm, Nate," he asserts, his voice rising. There is that corporate buzzword again, thrown around as if employment at a manufacturing plant is a solemn religious vow, while wage stagnation is a sacred duty. I chose legal economic options, I answer with measured precision, exactly as any prudent business administrator would when evaluating market value. Preston folds his arms tightly across his chest, leaning back to project authority. "I do not retain staff members who hedge their bets against this management team," he declares. "Summit Precision Manufacturing requires total commitment." There it is in plain language, the arrogant executive mask slipping away to reveal fragile insecurity. 21 years of keeping multi-million-dollar production lines operating smoothly, maintaining international compliance certifications that allow Summit to compete for Tier 1 automotive contracts, and protecting his quarterly metrics. All reduced to a hypocritical lecture about commitment. I committed over 2 decades of my life to this enterprise while he was still navigating middle school math. "So what are you formally declaring, Preston?" I ask, even though I already know the answer. I have seen this exact theatrical performance play out with other senior engineers who dared to ask for what they were worth. "I am terminating your employment effective immediately for breach of company loyalty standards," he says firmly. "No prior notice, no severance negotiation, no transition consultation, just an immediate security escort and badge revocation, as if I were a corporate threat rather than the chief architect of the plant's operational success." I gather my dark, heavy work jacket from the wall hook, the same durable canvas coat I have worn onto the shop floor for over 10 years without drama. 2 uniformed private security guards escort me down the central hallway, past the employee break room where I have shared morning coffee with legends every morning since the mid-90s. We walked past the primary quality testing station, where I personally trained 3 generations of lab technicians, many of whom are currently earning higher hourly rates than my non-adjusted salary. Preston watches from the glass panel of his second-story office, confident that he has just delivered a masterclass in executive discipline and restored control over his domain. The technicians along the main assembly line stop their machinery as they see me being marched toward the exit doors. Walter Kowalski, a 30-year veteran machinist who started at the plant during my father's era, steps away from his lathe and looks at me with pure disbelief. "This is absolute nonsense, Nate," Walter mutters under his breath as I pass by his workstation. The security personnel keep walking, but his words echo down the concrete corridor. Every experienced worker on that shop floor understands precisely what is transpiring. Management is sending a warning to anyone who dares challenge their wage ceiling. That night, as Karen and I sit in our living room watching the local evening news, my cell phone buzzes continuously on the coffee table. The first text message comes from Gerald Finch, the seasoned chief financial officer at Summit, and one of the few high-level administrators who consistently argued during board meetings that technical staff should receive competitive compensation. "Did Preston actually terminate your contract today?" Gerald writes. "Is he out of his mind?" By the following morning, the initial shock of the arbitrary dismissal had completely crystallized into sharp clarity. Preston Bennett believed he had successfully purged a vocal veteran employee who was getting too ambitious for his corporate hierarchy. What his inexperienced business school mindset failed to comprehend was that I had not merely supervised the quality control department. I had constructed the legal and structural foundation holding Summit's entire revenue model together. 6 years ago, when Summit Precision Manufacturing was aggressively bidding to secure Tier 1 supplier contracts with major automotive giants, including Autotech Industries, Johnson Controls, and Magna International, I personally authored the technical compliance annexes attached to those master service agreements. Tucked deep within Section 12 of every single commercial supply contract was a specific contractual stipulation known as the Key Personnel and Quality Oversight Continuity Clause. At the time of drafting, our corporate legal team presented this clause to prospective clients as a premium risk mitigation feature. Under Section 12, the purchasing clients were explicitly guaranteed that all component manufacturing would remain under the direct personal supervision of a certified master quality director. If that designated quality director departed, was transferred, or was terminated without a 90-day transition plan approved by the client, the corporate buyers retained the immediate legal right under commercial contract law to suspend all purchase orders, halt production lines, or terminate the multi-year agreements entirely within 30 days without incurring any financial penalty. When I drafted that clause 6 years ago, I framed it to instill complete buyer confidence in our manufacturing precision. I never anticipated that Preston Bennett's arrogance would turn Section 12 into the exact mechanism that would unravel his corporate career. By 11 o'clock that Friday morning, 3 of Summit's largest commercial clients had issued urgent formal meeting requests. They were demanding emergency executive sessions directly with the chair of the board of directors, Evelyn Foster. These were not emotional outbursts from disgruntled buyers. They were calculated, legally mandated risk management procedures being executed by billion-dollar corporations that do not tolerate supply chain vulnerabilities. When a manufacturing partner suddenly fires the sole engineer who designed, validated, and signed off on their component safety certifications, major clients do not panic. They protect their balance sheets. Reports from inside the administrative building revealed that Preston addressed the board members with his typical executive bravado. "This is merely routine operational noise," Preston reportedly told the board during a conference call. "Executive transitions occur in every organization. We will recruit a replacement director within a few weeks and continue operations seamlessly. Transitions are standard practice in generic administrative roles, but not when your international ISO technical certifications and $38 million in binding annual automotive contracts depend entirely on one individual's registered methodology and personal sign-off. Not when that individual designed the micro-tolerance inspection protocols that maintained our component defect rates below 0.6%, the exact benchmark required to maintain Tier 1 status under federal transportation safety standards. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my personal phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Jim Martinez, the Senior Director of Global Procurement at Autotech Industries, Summit's single largest commercial client, accounting for $9 million in annual revenue. Jim's tone was measured and professional, but I could detect the underlying urgency in his voice. "Nate, we were stunned to receive notification this morning regarding your immediate departure from Summit," Jim said without preamble. "As a matter of strict corporate compliance, Autotech is formally invoking Section 12, the Key Personnel Continuity Clause, across all 4 of our active supply agreements, effective immediately." Invoking Section 12 meant all production orders for their bearing components were frozen until a full technical audit could be conducted. The clause was never written out of personal malice. It was solid commercial insurance. Autotech had signed those multi-million-dollar contracts because they relied on my technical oversight. Removing me from the operational equation meant that Summit no longer possessed the certified human infrastructure required to fulfill their quality guarantee. "I completely understand your position, Jim," I replied calmly. "You have your own supply chain integrity and vehicular safety standards to protect." By late Friday afternoon, the first legal notice of contract suspension arrived at Summit's corporate headquarters via certified mail. Autotech was officially initiating a 30-day technical reassessment under Section 12 of their supplier agreement. Preston Bennett attempted to dismiss the document as mere legal posturing, but Chief Financial Officer Gerald Finch and the corporate legal counsel recognized the catastrophic reality. In Tier 1 automotive manufacturing, a formal contract reassessment triggered by key personnel termination almost never ends in contract renewal. It ends in total contract cancellation. That evening, Donald Miller, a junior quality technician whom I had hired 3 years prior, called my home phone. "Nate, you would not believe the chaos on the shop floor right now," Donnie reported. "Preston came down to the floor this afternoon with 2 HR managers, trying to give us an inspirational speech about embracing change. Half the assembly crew walked away from their machines while he was talking. Walter Kowalski stood up in front of everyone and told Preston directly that firing you was the single stupidest managerial decision made in the 50-year history of this plant. When a 30-year veteran machinist calls the executive officer an incompetent fool in front of the workforce, word spreads like wildfire across the regional industrial corridor. The myth of Preston's executive authority had vanished in less than 36 hours. My first full week at Vanguard Industrial Solutions felt like stepping into an entirely different industrial era. Located just 20 miles down the interstate, Vanguard was a modern manufacturing firm that prioritized engineering excellence over administrative optics. There were no corporate political maneuvers, no slick executives strutting through the hallways, delivering preachy speeches about unrequited loyalty, and no uncompensated overtime demands. Instead, there was a structured, deeply respectful work environment where technical expertise was treated as the core asset of the enterprise. On my second morning, Martin Coleman, the chief executive officer of Vanguard, walked into my new office. Martin was a veteran engineer who had spent 25 years running manufacturing facilities before founding Vanguard, a man who truly understood the fundamental difference between practical factory operations and theoretical corporate management. "We do not engage in talent poaching here, Nate," Martin said, leaning comfortably against the doorframe while holding 2 mugs of fresh coffee. "Exceptional talent simply seeks out environments where experience is valued and respected." He was not indulging in corporate flattery. He was stating company philosophy, backed by top-tier compensation packages, comprehensive health benefits, and total operational autonomy. By Wednesday afternoon, my personal cell phone was ringing constantly. Former client representatives, regional procurement managers, and plant supervisors from across the Midwest were reaching out with the exact same inquiry. Was I available to consult on their independent quality assurance frameworks? I maintained strict professional standards in every conversation, informing them that I was fully employed as Senior Quality Director at Vanguard Industrial Solutions, but that Vanguard was more than equipped to assist them with high-precision manufacturing contracts. In heavy industry, a reputation built on 2 decades of unblemished precision speaks far louder than any marketing campaign, and mine was speaking volumes. Meanwhile, back at Summit Precision Manufacturing, Preston Bennett was engaging in the classic behavior of insecure managers who realize their mistakes are catching up to them. He attempted to rewrite history to shield himself from accountability. Through industry contacts, I discovered that Preston had started spreading false claims to board members and regional trade partners, alleging that I had violated non-disclosure policies and had actively solicited Summit's client portfolio prior to my departure. He conveniently overlooked one critical legal truth. Digital communications possess immutable timestamps, and commercial contracts are governed by explicit federal statutory frameworks. You cannot rewrite legal reality simply because your own arrogance destroyed your quarter. On Thursday morning, Autotech Industries' corporate legal counsel issued a formal written clarification to both Summit Precision Manufacturing and Vanguard Industrial Solutions. The legal statement clearly documented that Nathan Vance had never solicited Autotech's commercial account. Rather, Autotech had independently invoked Section 12 of their supplier agreement due to Summit's failure to maintain certified quality personnel. 16 concise, legally ironclad words completely demolished Preston's false narrative before it could take root. Vanguard's legal counsel reviewed the document and filed it away without further action. Martin Coleman simply smiled when I showed him the letter, remarking that objective facts always outlast corporate politics. Simultaneously, a second legal storm was brewing inside Summit that Preston had failed to anticipate. When Preston locked me out of the factory network, he instructed the remaining junior technicians to utilize the automated micro-tolerance testing software running on our central quality workstations. However, that software suite was not company property. 5 years ago, I had personally authored the complex mathematical algorithms and written the proprietary code on my home computer to automate multi-axis bearing inspections. I had officially registered the software under federal copyright law, specifically 19 U.S.C. Section 106, which grants the author exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and license derivative works. I had merely granted Summit a revocable, non-exclusive internal user license tied directly to my personal employment as quality director. When my legal counsel sent a formal notice of license revocation and copyright infringement warning under federal statutory copyright provisions to Summit's executive team, corporate counsel informed Preston that continuing to run my proprietary software without my consent exposed Summit to statutory damages exceeding $150,000 per willful infringement violation under federal law. Deprived of my automated software and lacking my manual calibration methodology, the shop floor was forced to halt high-precision testing entirely. By Friday afternoon, the financial consequences began to hit Summit's balance sheet with devastating force. Autotech Industries officially delivered their final notice of contract termination, exercising their rights under Section 12 to withdraw their $9 million annual purchasing agreement. When a Tier 1 automotive manufacturer cancels a contract, they immediately reallocate their production tooling to alternative suppliers to safeguard their assembly plants. That evening, Gerald Finch sent me another brief text message from his personal phone. Board of Directors has called an emergency session for Monday morning. Preston is scrambling to build a defense, but the board members are furious. The financial metrics are collapsing. The following week inside Summit Precision Manufacturing transitioned rapidly from corporate damage control to full-scale enterprise crisis. I was not present in those executive boardroom meetings, but veteran staff and administrative contacts kept me fully informed. In a close-knit manufacturing hub like Cleveland, critical information moves fast, especially when local jobs and multi-million-dollar investments are on the line. Preston Bennett opened Monday morning's board meeting with his standard corporate slides, attempting to spin the situation as a minor bump in the road. We are navigating temporary market fluctuations and undergoing necessary structural adjustments, Preston asserted, using vague business terminology to mask total operational paralysis. Chief Financial Officer Gerald Finch, who had spent 20 years protecting Summit's balance sheet, interrupted Preston's presentation mid-slide. Our projected annual revenues are down 24% in less than 10 days, Bradley, Gerald stated flatly in front of the entire board. That is not a temporary market fluctuation. That is a complete structural collapse of our primary revenue stream. A 24% drop in revenue was not a minor variation that could be blamed on supply chain inflation or seasonal shifts. It was a catastrophic hemorrhage of Tier 1 commercial accounts, and every board member sitting around that table understood the math. Preston's response was as predictable as it was pathetic. He attempted to shift blame to shop floor technicians, proposed restructuring lower-level departments, and insisted that production would stabilize once a replacement manager was hired. He even suggested that terminating my position was actually an advantageous move that would allow Summit to modernize its quality oversight with younger, cheaper talent possessing fresh perspectives. Fresh Perspectives was executive code for hiring an inexperienced technician at half the market rate who would not understand the difference between rigid safety standards and corporate wishful thinking. But Tier 1 automotive buyers do not care about corporate buzzwords when their vehicle components face federal safety recalls. Within 72 hours of Autotech's departure, 2 additional major accounts, Johnson Controls and Magna International, officially invoked Section 12 of their respective commercial contracts. Together, their withdrawal represented an additional $7 million in immediate revenue loss, bringing Summit's total lost business to $16 million in less than 2 weeks. To make matters worse, the International Organization for Standardization issued a formal notice of an emergency quality audit. When an international accrediting body receives official notification that a certified Tier 1 supplier has terminated its designated primary quality director during active production contracts, they dispatch senior auditors equipped with strict compliance checklists. Seeing his executive authority evaporating, Preston made a desperate phone call to my personal cell phone on Wednesday morning. When I saw his office number appear on my screen, I was reviewing component stress reports for a major new client at Vanguard. I stepped into a quiet conference room to answer. "Nate, we need to handle this situation like reasonable business professionals," Preston began, his voice strained and noticeably lacking its previous bravado. "Come back to Summit. I am prepared to authorize a serious compensation review and offer a substantial salary adjustment." "You had 18 years to conduct a serious compensation review, Preston," I replied in a calm, steady tone. I kept my voice completely neutral, precisely as my father had taught me to handle high-stakes conflicts, calmly, directly, and without emotional heat. There was a long silence on the line before he spoke again. "This is not about past policy, Nate," he argued defensively. "The board of directors is panicking over temporary market adjustments. I have full executive authority to grant you a significant pay increase immediately." Noticeably absent from his offer was any apology for calling me disloyal, any acknowledgement of his arbitrary behavior, or any recognition that firing an experienced senior engineer over a LinkedIn profile was an egregious managerial error. To Preston, everything remained a transactional game of numbers. "I am not available for rehire, Preston," I answered firmly, "and I have zero interest in negotiating terms under duress." "You are making a monumental mistake," he snapped, his composure breaking as his underlying arrogance resurfaced. "You spent your entire career building your reputation at Summit. Walking away now throws all those years into the trash." "No, Preston," I said, looking down at my father's stainless steel watch. My scheduled break was ending, and I had actual engineering work to oversee. I built my skills and expertise at Summit. My career is what I accomplish with those skills going forward. He tried one final emotional lever. "Think about the workers on the shop floor, Nate. You are abandoning the very technicians who relied on your leadership." The sheer hypocrisy of his statement was staggering. Preston was invoking the welfare of the shop floor workers, whom he routinely underpaid while securing 6-figure executive bonuses for himself. You terminated my contract effective immediately, Preston, I reminded him quietly. You made that decision unilaterally for this entire facility. I ended the call and walked back to my desk. Martin Coleman passed by my office a few minutes later, gave me a subtle nod of understanding, and kept walking. True corporate leaders do not demand explanations when they trust your professional judgment. The legal fallout inside Summit continued to compound. Corporate legal counsel warned the board of directors that Preston's arbitrary firing of a 54-year-old senior director with 21 years of pristine service created severe legal liability under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act and the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act. Furthermore, as contract cancellations forced Summit to plan sudden plant slowdowns, the company faced massive legal penalties under the Federal Warrant Act for failing to provide the mandatory 60-day advance written notice required for large-scale employee dislocations. By Thursday morning, Summit's financial troubles reached the public markets. Summit's corporate stock opened down 16% after financial news outlets reported the sudden loss of Tier 1 supplier status and the pending ISO compliance audit. By Friday afternoon, the stock had plunged by a total of 36% over 2 weeks. A major private investment fund that had been finalizing a $25 million capital expansion deal to modernize Summit's machinery abruptly released a public statement. Due to severe operational instability, loss of key technical leadership, and unmitigated executive risk factors, investment discussions with Summit Precision Manufacturing are suspended indefinitely. $25 million in lost expansion capital meant that 180 prospective new manufacturing jobs in Cleveland were instantly wiped out. 180 local families lost the opportunity for stable wages and health care benefits, all because one arrogant executive prioritized his ego over institutional competence. The emergency board meeting convened by Evelyn Foster on Tuesday evening was neither quiet nor polite. By that time, Summit Precision Manufacturing's valuation had suffered a devastating 36% collapse in 2 weeks, and national industrial journals were citing Summit as a case study in administrative mismanagement. When an established manufacturing enterprise becomes a public cautionary tale regarding executive failure, board members stop listening to corporate excuses and start taking decisive action. Linda Foster, the board chair and daughter of the industrialist who founded Summit 50 years ago, led the session. According to Gerald Finch, who attended as chief financial officer, Evelyn bypassed all standard corporate pleasantries and confronted Preston directly. How did this enterprise transition from industry-leading efficiency to the brink of financial insolvency in less than 14 business days, she demanded. Preston attempted his final deflection strategy, blaming global market volatility, aggressive competitor poaching by Vanguard, and alleged employee sabotage. This is a coordinated campaign to undermine my management team, Preston claimed. Nathan Vance intentionally engineered this operational disruption to harm Summit. Evelyn Foster cut him off instantly. She had spent her youth around manufacturing plants and understood the physical realities of production. No, Preston, she said with quiet intensity. This is not sabotage. This is direct consequence. You arbitrarily terminated our most vital quality director during active contract cycles without consulting this board or reading our client agreements. What outcome did you realistically expect? The board vote was swift and decisive. 7 votes in favor of immediate removal, 1 abstention, and 0 opposed. Under corporate bylaws, the board formally cited Preston Bennett for breach of fiduciary duty to shareholders, revoking his executive severance package entirely. The public press release issued by Summit that evening was written in cold corporate prose. Executive leadership change effective immediately. Interim management appointed. Commitment to structural stabilization. In plain English, Preston had been ousted and shown the door. That night, an email arrived in my personal inbox from an unfamiliar web address. The subject line was empty. The message contained 7 words. You destroyed everything I worked so hard to build. I stared at the screen for a moment, then permanently deleted the message without replying. There was no need to engage. I had not destroyed his career. He had simply collided head-on with the unyielding consequences of his own arrogance and incompetence. 6 months have passed since that turbulent period, and the rhythm of my professional life feels profoundly different. It is defined by quiet pride and steady progress. With my new executive compensation package at Vanguard Industrial Solutions, Karen and I successfully refinanced our home mortgage on favorable terms. Our son graduated with his mechanical engineering degree without taking on a single dollar of student debt, and our daughter is applying to top-tier universities without financial strain on our household. Last month, Vanguard's board of directors officially promoted me to Vice President of Global Quality Assurance, awarding me substantial equity participation and full operational authority over regional testing facilities. There are no political mind games, no vague promises to review compensation next quarter, only genuine respect for technical experience and fair compensation for delivered value. During an executive strategy session last week, a newly hired junior manager asked me about long-term employee retention. What truly keeps experienced technical professionals loyal to an enterprise? She inquired. I looked around the conference table at men and women who understood that real manufacturing depends on skill, not corporate rhetoric. Respect must be reciprocal, I answered. Pay your people what they are worth in the open market. Grant them authority that matches their technical responsibility, and never confuse a professional's patience for weakness or their experience for an unnecessary expense. Summit Precision Manufacturing managed to survive the crisis, but only barely. Evelyn Foster stepped in as interim chief executive officer, restructured internal departments, and managed to re-engage 2 of the lost contracts after offering substantial pricing concessions and guaranteeing strict quality oversight. Gerald Finch sent me a message recently, noting that while the facility has stabilized, it will take years to rebuild the global reputation that Preston Bennett destroyed in 2 weeks. 3 of the senior technicians I trained at Summit, including Walter Kowalski's nephew and Sarasa Jenkins, have since joined my team at Vanguard, where their skills are properly compensated. As for Preston Bennett, industry networking sites indicate he landed a mid-level advisory role at a boutique consulting firm, hiding behind a vague job title that sounds impressive to those unfamiliar with his track record. His reputation within actual manufacturing circles is permanently ruined, though there will always be a market for consultants who promise quick cost-cutting fixes to complex engineering challenges. I never celebrated his professional downfall. True vindication was not found in his failure, but in watching competence and integrity finally triumph over corporate arrogance. Freedom and self-respect are not given away. They are earned through patience, documentation, and the courage to know your own worth. When you build robust operational systems rather than relying on corporate politics, you create a foundation that outlasts any single executive's ego. If you currently find yourself in an environment where your experience is taken for granted, where your compensation is frozen while expectations double, and where next quarter has become a permanent excuse, remember that you always possess choices. You are never disloyal for protecting your family's financial future. Sometimes the most powerful action you can take is to quietly walk away. Step into an organization that values your worth and let the numbers prove your point.